Okay.
Okay, shall I start now?
So just give us few seconds.
Okay.
Okay. For the audience, we just give me the privilege to introduce Dr. Gopal Sarangi to all of you. Dr. Sarangi is Dr. Sarangi is an economist with more than 15 years of research and consulting experience. Sir presently is working as a faculty in the Department of Policy and Management Studies in TERI, School of Advanced Studies. Sir's primary domain of research covers energy market and regulation, intersection of energy technologies, fuels, and resources with public policies, social systems, and processes, energy and climate nexus, governance and institutional analysis of energy transition, questions and impact assessment of energy and environmental interventions. Sir has completed his PhD on sustainability assessment of India electricity sector from TERI School of Advanced Studies, which is in New Delhi. He has contributed as a principal investigator, as a co-principal investigator, and team member to several collaborative projects. To his credit, he has published several peer-reviewed research papers in the domain of his research and has been invited to deliver talks in several national and international forums. He teaches courses on developmental economics, managerial economics, and environmental economics. We are glad that Sir has accepted our invitation as he is amongst us for this invited talk today. Now, I would request Sir to take over. The floor is all yours, Sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Stravani, for this generous introduction. It's a pleasure to have myself here in this. And don't need to call me Sir. Gopal or Dr. Gopal will be enough. That's too much. So thanks. First of all, at the outset, I'd like to thank Professor Hipu and Dr. Hari for inviting me to this forum to discuss about some of the interesting ideas that are coming up in the context of energy transition in Indian setting. So what I'll do in the next 45 minutes or so is that I'll take you through some of the issues that have been currently undergoing. I hope that my PPT is visible. Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Right. So the schematic of the presentation goes like this. So I would spend some time discussing about the concept of energy transition, and more importantly, from the point of view of Indian context. Then I'll give you a broader umbrella picture of how this transition is getting unfolded in the larger global context, and more specifically, what do you see in terms of the trends and the developments patterns in the context of India. And I'll be primarily focusing on two key issues of transition. When you talk about transitioning from non-renewables to renewables, if you call it so, of course, the transition is more like a vague concept. It requires a lot of discussion, particularly context-specific definitions and all that. So primarily, I'll be talking about the transition which is being currently envisaged from coal to renewables. And second one is there is a lot of dichotomies, debates going on around centralized projects. Centralized, when I say centralized projects, centralized renewable energy projects vis-a-vis your decentralized projects. I believe that some of these points might have been covered by the keynote speaker, my colleague, Dr. Devajit Palit. We work together in TERI. We've collaborated a lot of projects. So just to begin with, I think when you look at this concept of energy transition, which is quite complex, essentially this transition is driven by the global commitments and also by the domestic compulsions, and leading to structural changes in many ways. And these structural changes are sometimes specific to the countries, sometimes more generic in approach. So this transition, when you talk about transition, it gets manifested in many ways. It could be transition in terms of fuel type, access to resources, sourcing, delivery, reliability, end use. And there has been a lot of research requires to look at these issues. When you talk about delivery, so that itself can be deconstructed, there could be several interesting papers. It's nice to see that in the morning I've been kind of observing there are so many interesting papers got submitted and presented in this conference. Really interesting to hear about this presentation. So scale, structure, quality of this transition is something which is crucial. Because it could happen at different scales, and I can bring out some elements, some of the interesting aspects which are happening at different scales. It could be at a macro scale, a national scale. It could also could be a regional scale. And structure, I mean, how the structure is going to change, given that the energy sector itself is very dynamic, something which you need to think about. Quality is very important when it comes to countries like India, because what we are essentially trying to look at, one is that you get the numbers, but are the numbers adequate? Are you looking at beyond numbers? And the real example is energy access. For instance, we talk about energy surplus in our country. So that's something questionable. I belong to a village in Orissa. Just I went in November to my village. What I found is that even today, 6 hours of electricity is not available. So when in village, 6 hours of electricity is not available, how could you connote that it's something which is energy surplus? We need to think about it, whether it's energy surplus or somewhere the problem is lying else. Then you have, if you look at, there is also a trend which has evolved in terms of the regulatory penetration as well as market penetration. I'll throw some light on this as well later on. Then there are several critical questions related to transition, which we are not about very sure about it. How and why transitions occur? What are the, as I said, is it push factor, pull factor? Is it global commitments? India as a very global citizen, large context of the development which is happening. Is it COP26, SDGs, or larger national international goals which are actually driving the transition, or is it something domestic compulsion? As I said, it's, for instance, like cities, 10 most cities in India are getting are numbered at top 10 polluting cities. Is the pathway of transition same for all countries? So when we talk about this transition, are there context-specific factors which actually can drive the transition? What do you exactly mean by this? Is it something which should be driven by the country-specific requirements, or will it be generic, more top-down, more something which is kind of imposed on the countries? Is it driven by technology or policy or combination of both? Is something which is technology driving the transition, or policy, or the requirements? It could be, there could be several other factors which could be driving it. What are the implications of this transition? This is very crucial. Because when we are actually transiting, one is that the rate of transition is not known. Sometimes it differs depending on technology, depending on context. Is it radical transition or incremental, which is important? Then what are the implications at what scale? We recently did a project on electric vehicles. So when we look at this, the way that actually we are transiting from the conventional vehicles to electric vehicles, are you making it more inclusive? What are, if not, what are the issues that we need to include them so that it becomes more inclusive nature? So finding out the implications for each of the vertical levels, scales, for each types of stakeholders is very, very important when you think about this transition. So it becomes crucial for us to understand this, and there is a clear gap in terms of doing research. There has been a lot of research done in other countries' context, finding out definition, applying that, identifying the implications. But when it comes to looking at these implications in developing country settings, we'll have to be very careful. So these are the issues. I'll be throwing some light on this. Then there are short-term objectives vis-a-vis your long-term goals. What is that we need to, how do you make the balance? So these are essentially crucial issues. You need to throw some light on this. Just quickly, I'll give you some trends which are actually happening globally. This everybody knows about this. This particular diagram, everybody, I think most of you are knowing about it. One of the important things here coming out is that the per capita CO2 emission, if you look at, which is debate going on, because the debate is that how do you allocate the carbon space, carbon budget, they call it globally. So whether it should be based on the absolute emissions which are coming out from different countries, or it should be based on per capita emissions. So if you look at per capita emissions, India is lying much, much below compared to even the global average. So this is a debate which is unresolved, going on, continuously fighting is going on. What should be the approach when you think about allocating the carbon space, carbon budget? So this has been rightly pointed out by Professor Kirit Parikh in one of the meetings recently, that we should be very specific about how we are going to allocate the carbon budget that is available globally, and whether this has been taken into consideration when it comes to technology flow and financial flow from developed countries to developed countries. Now, this is that when you talk about transition, it's not something very new. If you look at historically, there have been transitions happening. At least 3 different transition pathways can be identified. One, which is where we move from traditional biofuels to coal. and then from coal to oil and gas, and then we are moving from oil and gas to renewables. Of course, if you look at intensity of this transition, the pathways, it may not be exactly reflecting what is happening in Indian context. Probably the coal to oil and gas, we have not really experienced that much as it happened in European countries. If you look at European countries and all that, so they are actually, if there is a gas, there is a whole debate going on. I mean, COP26, there are a lot of debate going on about gas, okay, because they're focusing on coal, but then you also have to think of how to get away from this gas trap. This is exactly, of course, this data is essentially giving you the electricity generation capacity, which essentially tells you that, okay, and essentially what happens is that your renewable capacity is kind of overriding the non-renewable capacity. But there are problems. We'll come to that when discuss about specific problems that we face in Indian context. Now, there are a lot of projections done by various organizations. The government has done that. Niti Aayog also has done that. And this is a projection done at the global scale where it is expected that by 2050, your renewables will be surpassing your traditional fossil fuel. But then actually, there are complex issues. We'll discuss. Let us have look at what is the trends or what kind of trends that you observe when you look at the transitions. One of the recent developments, as I said, is because of this transition, states are repositioning themselves. There have been changing geopolitics. And this geopolitics, I think Professor Hippu has done extensive work on this earlier, looking at how geopolitics is working on, particularly in the Indian context. What I'm trying to bring in through this slide is that the geopolitics around energy, of course, there has been a lot of geopolitics happening today because of this war, and I don't want to get into those issues that requires a lot of different attention. But what you see here is that 20th century, last century, geopolitics around energy was primarily revolving around location of energy supplies, because you had specific countries, those who are owning or having reserves of oil and gas. But what is happening, this geopolitical map is fast changing, primarily because of large-scale penetration of renewables. Renewables primarily, even though Honorable Prime Minister is talking about one grid, one globe and all that, but then it becomes very difficult, tenuous to move energy from one part of the country to the other part of the globe, or one part of the globe to other part of the globe if you are relying on renewables. So what is happening essentially is that markets, global energy markets, are becoming more regional. So we are trying to think of, okay, of course, we have been trading, India is trading with other countries, Southeastern countries, but then it is trying to bring a regional market for it. And this market mechanism, creating this kind of market is feasible if you look at this particular slide. This particular slide tells you the load complementarity. In a very simple language, load complementarity tells you that whenever you need more energy, India needs more energy. Probably Bangladesh is not requiring that much energy, or Nepal is not requiring. So there is a complementarity exists. And there is also, I was discussing with somebody in Niti Aayog, who is an advisor in this energy advisor. He is saying that renewable energy is primarily building on this flexibility. So if you can actually draw, let's say Nepal is primarily relying on hydro and you are relying on renewables. So you can have this complementarity existing. Then you can actually create a regional market, which will be win-win. Not only that, I think those who have engineering background, they may be knowing is that there is something which is called your peak demand of peak demand. So if you're actually meeting your peak demand, then you have to create a lot of assets, which largely go unutilized most of the time, except the peak period. So if you can actually meet your peak demand by drawing energy from other countries, this will be really going to be a win-win situation and beneficial financially as well as in terms of the energy requirements. Now let us again look at some of the trends that are happening in Indian context. As you know that there have been targets set by Indian government, 500 gigawatt by 2030. And there have been specific targets about procuring or installing 280 gigawatt from through solar. As I said, there have been these developments are not only by the domestic compulsions, right, like your energy requirement, energy security, and all that, also global commitment, SDGs, COP26, all these commitments are there. So India has to rise up to that level. So then there have been proposed changes. And these proposed changes are in terms of energy mix, structural changes, all this happening. Energy mix has been changing fast. Of course, there are issues because recently government also has kind of redefined hydro energy. Okay, so they said earlier, they said big hydros are not renewables. Now they're saying, okay, big hydro is also renewable. So there have been actually complexities, policy level complexities, which are entangled when you think of defining your renewables. More than 100 gigawatt, close to 30% of the total installed capacity have been deployed. Of course, there are problems. When you say capacity deployed in energy, those who have been walking this field, they know that simplicity, capacity deployment is different from what is being generated. So even though 1/4 of your, of course, close to that, okay, a little more than that, has been renewables, the capacity is renewables, but then the actual energy generation is close to 10%. So there is a problem. So how much you have actually deployed, that much energy is not being generated. Then you have new sources being explored. Of course, these sources are giving prioritized attention in the recent context of you have hydrogen mission declared recently last week. Hydrogen policies have been declared by Government of India. Deep Ocean Mission, BP and your Reliance have started exploring gas and oil in the Bay of Bengal region. That basin, shale gas, 64 basin sites have been identified by the Indian government side, but then there are problems. When you actually diversify, let's say shale gas, I know one of my PhD students is working on shale gas. So they have identified 64 shale gas sites. Well, the problem is that shale gas, they call it fracking in Europe and USA also. There have been a lot of complications around shale gas exploration. Because when you actually frack and get gas from the rock, you need huge amount of water to pump in and huge amount of water to pump out. That the pumped in water should be fresh water, pumped out water should be polluted water. And most of these basins in Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh, and West Bengal. So you need huge amount of fresh water. Where do you get this water? Fresh water, that means if you look at West Bengal context, you know that, okay, West Bengal is a region which is already suffering from arsenic contamination. So the water is already polluted. And if you need some huge amount of fresh water, you need to pump in and you get huge amount of polluted water. Where do you go to dispose this polluted water? So there has been a lot of complications involved when you think of any of these new areas of exploration, new areas of energy where you need to diversify. Similar case with Andhra Pradesh. In Andhra Pradesh, water scarcity is a major problem. And you have a significant amount of shale reserves are there in Andhra Pradesh. So you have to be very careful, you have to be strategic when you think about start diversifying your energy portfolio, bringing new sources of energy. Modalities are changing. I'll come to this in a moment. We have been moving, if you look at some of those who are actually working, how the tariffs are being decided by the regulatory commissions. We have been moving from a regulatory tariff making process to reverse auctions. And there has been a pathway. I'll come to that. In one of my papers, I've tried to do a bit of research. Some of you can actually take it forward. There have been recent focus on decentralized energy system. I'll speak about it more when I discuss about this. Whole lot of new reforms, policy initiatives. You know that the energy sector is itself very dynamic. And most importantly, what happens in Indian context, the energy is in the concurrent list. That actually, I don't know whether that is creating is opportunity or problem. Nobody knows, because when an item is concurrent list, so both the subnational entities and your central government are equally empowered to legislate on energy. And that is why I see that when you talk about e-vehicles, when you talk about your renewable energy policies, so you have state-specific policies, and they differ. And they differ across in terms of kind of devising specific provisions for the energy. Sectoral integration is happening. Energy sector is getting integrated with the transport sector. And there are a lot of problems. Probably if you get time, we can reflect on that. So these are essentially the changes that are happening in Indian context. Just to quickly give you some data and trends which are happening in Indian context, I've already spoken about it. So this is exactly telling you how much of renewable, RES stands for renewable energy systems. So you see that the installed capacity by energy types, when you look at that data, so you see that recently the renewable energy capacity is increasing, but then there are problems I told you specifically. The problem is that even though the installed capacity has increased, but then there are systemic issues. You're not able to uptake the energy. You're not able to utilize the energy in a way that is being generated. So what is essentially happening at the end of the day is that you could only use 10% of the energy which is being produced from renewables. So in a basket, the exact amount of energy which is coming from renewables is not that significant. So that's clear from this particular diagram. Interestingly, if you look at a very simple diagram, very simple, but one of the powerful diagrams, essentially tells you that, if, of course, there are legacy issues. It essentially tells you, if you look at, let's fossil fuel industry, look at who is generating in the fossil fuel sector. It is primarily, even though we have allowed private sector to enter into this industry, but then today even more than 50% energy assets for the fossil fuels are owned by the government extended enterprises, and NTPC, NHPC, continue to own the fossil fuel assets. But if you look at renewables, We in economics, Professor Hipu knows it about that. So we call it positive externality. If a particular product or item is generating positive externality, it is expected that the government should subsidize. So renewables, unlike fossil fuel, I don't know it's fortunate or unfortunate, is primarily driven by the private sector. So you can see this. This particular diagram tells you that more than 90% of the assets are owned by the private sector. So hence, you'll have to take a very different approach when it comes to policy making, when it comes to policy implementation, when it comes to policy realization, to think about how renewables can be promoted in a more socially inclusive manner, because all the assets are owned by private, almost all the assets are owned by the private investors. This is again what you can draw from this particular slide. This is again very interesting. Most of you probably knowing about it. I don't want to spend much time on it. What is coming out clearly from this slide is that there have been, as I said, that when you look at the price discovery process in the Indian energy sector, you see that we have actually kind of traversed a path. I'll come to that path. This particular diagram tells you that the price which is discovered in, I recall in 2012, I think it was 17 rupees. Now, if you look at that, the price of renewables is solar particularly is 2 rupees or around that. It evolves around that, 2 to 3 rupees, you can say maximum. Now, what is happening in this space is that let me take you, and of course, when you look at this, as I said, that energy is in the concurrent list. This particular slide essentially gives you the idea that how states are heterogeneously presented. So look at that, some states are leaders, some states are laggards. It is not only the potential. Of course, everybody says, okay, potential is different. When you look at Gujarat, look at Karnataka, look at Rajasthan, so they are rich in solar and all that. But there are also states having less potential, but very strong policy. So they're driving the renewables. So I think this is essentially being reflecting the fact that energy being in the concurrent list gives you this idea that you have heterogeneities present when you look at the energy performances across states. Now, not only that, I'll take you to this slide, which essentially tells you how the instruments, when I say instruments, I'm primarily referring to the fiscal instruments, financial instruments, information-based instruments, regulatory instruments, all kinds of instruments, which are basically, I said that since renewables are primarily driven by the private investors, what government essentially has done, that has come up with a lot of instruments to promote renewables. There is history to it. You can go back to 1993, feed-in tariff declared by MNES. Today's MNRE was known as MNES in 1993. And what I've done, this is actually taken from one of my papers, where I'm trying to understand how these instruments have evolved over time. What I've done, I see that there are 3 different phases. One, publicly supported instrument regime. Second one, mix of publicly supported and market-driven instrument regime. Third one, which is currently undergoing, is more like a market-driven approach or market-driven regime. If you look at publicly supported, if you go back, some of you, those who are working in energy field, they may be knowing about it. You have this accelerator depreciation. You have this GBI, generation-based instruments, incentives. All these are, of course, primarily meant for wind energy development in Tamil Nadu and Kerala. But then you also introduce RPO, viability gap funding, and all these. Most of these instruments, you can say, these are publicly supported. Then it comes to an era, a regime, a period, where you bring in publicly supported and market-driven approaches. The glaring example is renewable energy certificates, REC. REC, part of it is actually decided by the regulatory entities. Because what is done, let's say you are a developer of renewables. What you can do that you can actually sell your energy to the state grid at a price, we call it APPC. Now, rest of what can do is that you get certificate. For every megawatt hours of electricity that is being sold to the grid, you get a certificate. And the certificate can be traded in the market. So you can see part of it is actually regulatory, based on the regulatory decisions. Part of it is actually market driven because you do not know the price of certificate. It will be primarily driven by the supply and demand. So that is a market which is operating there and deciding how much you will get per every megawatt hours of electricity that you are converting into certificates. So this is essentially second era where you see that there is a mix of publicly supported versus market-driven, what you call kind of a regime. Now we are moved to something like, look at this currently what is happening. You have green energy trading introduced in 2020. You have competitive bidding introduced in 2017. You have 2015 competitive bidding for solar. You have auction market, reverse auctions. So all these markets are essentially believing the fact that the price can be discovered through supply and demand. Of course, there are problems when we call supply and demand because there are distortions. So market is perfect or not, we do not know. There are market imperfections which are existing when you look at auctions. Right? So this is what you see how the instruments have evolved over time. And these instruments can be categorized into different groups. I don't want to spend much time on this. Let me directly come to so this is essentially a very broad brush of what is happening in the field of energy. Let me speak now 10 minutes on one of the complexities when you look at transition and 10 minutes on the other complexities. Now, what is happening is that when you look at this transition process, I will specifically focusing on this coal locking. Everybody knows, okay, India is, and there is a lot of debate going on in COP26, coal phase down versus coal phase out. So India said, no, we are not going to coal phase out because coal is an economy for us. We can only at the best, okay, we can go for coal phase down. So you can actually look at the debate which is going on. Coal sector is an integral part of the Indian economy. So significant employment effects. Coal sector is one of the largest informal employer in this country. So you cannot quickly say, okay, you close down all the coal plants tonight and tomorrow let us rely on renewables. Have to, that I told in the very beginning, whether it is radical or incremental, whether it should be context specific or it should be driven by top-down prescriptions. Not only that, 44% of freight charges, railway freight charges are coming from coal. And there have been reports which telling you that this charge is subsidizing the tickets, okay, which are railway tickets for the poorer class of society. Moving away forward, not that, it's not that easy. Not only that, if you look at eastern side of the country, particularly your MP, Jharkhand, West Bengal, Orissa, UP, and mostly, primarily 3 or 4 states, those are relying on coal. They get substantial amount of royalties from the coal. It's close to like 20%. So particularly in Orissa, 15%, you can look at this data. I don't know how it's visible to you or not, but I think this gives you an idea that how coal stands as a source of revenue for the states. More importantly, as I said, there are scale effects. One is that when you look at, as I said, states are getting revenue. There is something called district mineral foundation. One of my PhD students is working on this, looking at what could be the possible impacts on this. So district mineral foundation is essentially an entity which has been created by the 2015 law, which essentially tells you that if your mining activity is going on a district, so they should provide some kind of welfare funding to the districts. And it has been reported that 40% of the districts, okay, in India has some form of dependence on coal. So you get money from coal and then you spend money that, and whether that is being spent or not, that's a different thing. I don't want to get into that, but the clear indication is that there has been a significant reliance on mining activities by the districts in terms of the development. And coal is a significant mining activity which contributes indirectly, directly into for the development of the states. Not only that, we did recently a project by CMPDA looking at what could possibly be the livelihood options that can be created. We found that wherever I belong to Orissa, I told you that I have been gone to those sites. What we observed that if you have ever gone to those sites, that wherever either it is a thermal power plant or a coal mining area, a local economy is created. You have shops, you have schools being built, health hospitals being built, and these are actually, there have been legal issues. You cannot close it quickly, right? So it becomes very, very important for us to understand when we are actually transiting. No, I'm not in favor of coal. I'm basically saying that when you're transiting from coal to renewables, so you have to identify what could be the process, what are the pathways, are you inclusive enough? More importantly, it might lead to widening of disparities. Why? Because in eastern belt of the country is rich in coal, and western and southern belt of the country are actually rich in renewables. And in economic terms, socioeconomic development terms, if you look at GDP data or you look at socioeconomic indicator, any indicator pick up. So eastern belt is relatively poor compared to western belt and southern belt. So when you're closing down the coals, they're making people unemployed without creating adequate alternative employments. It might accentuate the disparities. That is one. Second, those who are employed in coal and those who are employed in renewables, the skill sets are different. So you have to either create capacity, because if the skill sets are different, so it becomes challenging to move them when you close down the coal plants to the renewables. You have to create new capacities. So are you thinking about these things? So this is one of the complexities that are involved when you look at transitions. So there have been, this data is clear. So this recent data study clearly tells, Sandeep Pai has done this exercise for his PhD work in Canada. You can refer to this work. So there have been, as I said, there are significant impacts when you move away from coal to renewables. So you'll have to very strategic, look at what could possible impacts, what could be the best alternative pathway. This is one of the the issues that you see when you look at coal. Coal, you can see this, the coal mining is in kind of orange and the other one is light green, which is coal power plant. You see that there are impacts on revenues, railways gets revenue, states get revenue, districts get revenue, there are impacts on jobs, and there are other impacts as well. So it's not that easy to move away from coal economy to an renewable economy in a sudden or in a radical manner. You have to be very careful when you think about this. This is one. Second debate, which I like to throw some light, is essentially a debate which is going on between the decentralized energy systems versus centralized energy systems. So look at this. If you look at historically what is happening, that if you look at the history of renewables in India, it's not new. If you go back, we have created state nodal agencies in different states. PEDA, Punjab, nodal agency for the renewables. OREDA in Orissa, WARDA in West Bengal. All these entities are not new. They have been created for the last 40 years, 1980 when the oil crisis happened in 1973-77. So that means that the move to renewables is not new. Of course, the rate and the size was very slow. Initially, it is primarily kind of activities you are demonstrating. I remember in my village, there used to be a small solar panel in my school providing electricity to the telephone operation. So you can actually imagine that the history of renewables in India is not new. Of course, the acceleration started. There have been a lot of reforms parallelly happened in the electricity sector, starting from the 1995 Odisha Electricity Reform Act, then you have 1990 Act, then you have 2003. In fact, 2003 Electricity Act was in fact a watershed movement for renewables as well. So there have been specific mention about procuring renewables, and then you started looking at how things can be progressed. You, as I said, that there have been a lot of instruments designed and applied, and then this was further accelerated by the climate mission declared in 2008, and then further developments happened. What is happening in the process is that if you look at particularly what happened after 2003 Act, there have been a lot of focus on initially on patchy and sporadic decentralized energy systems, renewable energy systems. I can recall LABL program of TERI, husk power system. They electrified, I think, several villages in Bihar and Madhya Pradesh, EP. Similarly, we did a project where EPSRC funded 4 villages with Devajit Palit in electrified. So we did that. Odisha, we did it in Kalahandi one and Dhenkanal the other one. So these activities are very patchy and sporadic because at that time, electrification was not actually reached everywhere. So then what you did is basically you started setting up either initially it is biomass, then you moved to solar. So villages are getting electricity in a decentralized mode. But when the electrification happened, and as you know that today, there has been a claim made that, okay, all the willing households have been electrified. So you are essentially moving away from the decentralized to centralized. So all the patchy sporadic efforts which have been made earlier are trying, they're kind of getting they're not given attention. Then most of them are supposed to be connected to grid, but the size was very low, so it is not very remunerative, so left out in the system. Now, what is happening? Let me come to this. As I said, there have been a lot of focus on upgrade small interventions, small scale interventions. But if you look at the target, government's target, 175 target, which is supposed to be met by this year, okay, 40 gigawatt is kept to be fulfilled through decentralized. When I say decentralized, I mean it could be upgrade, it could be a grid also, it could be primarily rooftop, or it could be like something your agricultural based systems. Now the problem is that what is happening here is that in the process, decentralized energy systems have received very less attention, and it is actually centralized systems which received a lot of attention, and primarily because they're large in size and their focus was to reduce the cost. As a result of which, decentralized energy systems have lost their relevance in the process. And the loss that has actually happened to decentralized energy systems was also happened at the cost of this. Look at this particular slide. So it has been said that solar industry in India is becoming a big boys club. That means all the small investors which are there in the market before 2015, at least for 5-7 years or a decade, they have left the industry. And it's primarily the big industries, Reliance, Renew Power, Adani, all these are coming up. And there are a lot of mergers and acquisition activities happen. All the big plants are actually kind of buying the small plants. Because I told you, you have started something which is called auction. I told you in the earlier slides. So the auction mechanism has led to reduction of the primary focus was to produce power at low cost. So they have in the process forgot everything. They are focusing on large scale projects. They're focusing on producing power at low cost. They are focusing on a big size, what do you call, investors coming in. That's good. You can actually produce power by doing that. But then in the process, I said there has been a target. It's not that policy has completely, oblivious of the things. Policy has recognized this. There has been a 40 gigawatt target which has been kept. But if you look at the achievements, even today, 1/4 of this has been successful compared to our centralized projects. So there has been a negligence or kind of a lethargic approach which has happened with the decentralized projects. Another reason I said that because of this mergers and acquisitions, because of uncompetitive price discovered through auctions, because small investors couldn't compete with big investors. When big investors are discovering the power price at 2 rupees renewables, how could small investors be producing the power at that rate? So that led to selling away mergers and acquisitions, all these activities. Now let us throw some light looking at the cost of this DRE. Everybody knows if you're actually setting up a small project, those who are from economics, they know, okay, there is something called scale economies, right? So you see that the LCOE, which you call it like levelized cost of energy, the small energy projects will be more costly compared to the large energy projects, which is clear. One of my colleagues has done that, Sapan Thapar, who has conducted this study and looked at the price. Even if you look at, okay, if you calculate all the cost, for example, how the price is discovered through the auction process, the price of the cost of small scale projects are coming out to 4 rupees something, and then large scale projects are 3 rupees 32 paisa. So there is a clear difference in terms of the cost. But what is missing out in the process? I'll just look at those missing elements. So the process which is actually happening here, if you look at this particular slide, it gives an idea that there are certain elements which have not been taken into consideration when you look at centralized projects. And these are essentially the hidden cost. So power transmission cost, of course, power transmission, as I said, there is a cost because you transmit power, so you have to pay to the company who is transmitting power. And then you have loss in the process. You have, let's say, even if you're considering loss at a vertical in a transmission loss is not that significant usually. Of course, the distribution loss is significant. So even if you're considering 3.30% of the loss, so it comes out to be some amount in terms of monetary impacts. Then you have fueling. That means how are you transmitting power at a lower voltage? Okay, so you have loss at certain level 6%. Then you pay the charges. There are power trading margins. If you calculate all these costs, what is coming out is that your centralized power plants are not that cost effective as being shown. Okay, so when you look at these two slides, two columns, one column centralized PV, solar PV, where you see that if you include all these cost elements, you see the total cost is coming out to 4 rupees per every unit of power that is being produced and being supplied. Similarly, in decentralized projects, is 4.07. So you can see the cost effectiveness which is being shown. When you look at the centralized power projects, it's not that true always. There are certain hidden costs. We need to take that into consideration when you look at this. This is one. Second, land. Huge issue. Land. India is a land-deprived country. And you know that land has multiple, it's a social aspect, it has economic aspect. It's very much integrated with the culture. And solar projects are very, very land intensive. So it requires, on an average, of course, it differs depending on the size of the project. But what you can see is that you need 2 acres of land for every megawatt of capacity you are deploying. So you can imagine how much of land that you need if you are setting up big projects at one place. If you are having decentralized projects, let's say your rooftop, even if you're doing it, let's say ground mounting projects, ground mounted projects. You can manage because this will be either in a backyard or on the roof. So you do not really exactly need huge amount of land. Not only that, what we call actually the wasteland in Indian context, that's not true. I told you that I belong to a village. I've seen that none of the wastelands are actually wasteland. It is being used for some purpose. And most of these purposes are social elements integrated because somebody is, let's say, what do you call, cultivating, harvesting something there, or somebody is grazing his livestock animals, or doing something, some activities, okay? So which is actually basically most of the activities are done primarily for livelihood purposes. So when we say wasteland, we'll have to be very careful. What is being written in paper in wasteland may not be exactly true when you look at the use of this. So use and the presence are different, two different things. So when you look at the use of this wasteland and the presence, it may not be exactly matching. Then we also study in economics, we call opportunity cost of land. So when we're actually using land, okay, you say, okay, there are different prices being discovered. So there are opportunity cost of land. So that essentially means that when you look at this opportunity cost, it could be much more higher than what is being paid for it, right? So in this context, land is something which actually clearly makes a difference between why should you go for decentralized energy projects than the centralized projects. This is one. Second, water requirement. And more importantly, when you look at that, of course, the water requirement would be same for decentralized energy projects and centralized projects. So essentially it tells you, if you look at the data, the amount of water needed to clean a single solar panel is 3 to 5 liters per panel of 300 watt. Okay, 250 to 300 watt panel will be requiring 5 liters of water. Okay, and more water when you look at the when it becomes setting up a project in arid region. What is important in this is, one is the cost. You can actually look at the slide and find out. But more importantly, if you look at where these projects are located, almost all centralized projects, major projects, UMPPs and all that, these big projects, big solar projects are located in the arid region, either in Rajasthan or Karnataka, Papgada, go to Papgada area. Okay, so what you see is that one is that these projects are located in areas which are scarce of water. So and these projects are huge size. You need huge amount of water in one place. If you are decentralizing water, let's say the requirement would be there, but then your projects are decentralized. Probably the pressure of water requirement won't be that much, right? So it becomes important for us to, given that, and everybody says about this water, the third world war would be on water, right? So you can imagine the importance of water in Indian context and what kind of problems that are facing. Everybody, most of us face water problem, right? And you know that the kind of water that, if you, let's say, go to village, okay, I go and just use my hand pump and get a glass of water, drink it directly. But when you're actually staying in Delhi or somewhere else in urban area, you know that for one glass of water, you waste 3 glasses of water when you get that water from the filter. So you can imagine the pressure of water, the requirement of water, the water scarcity. There are studies where talking about the scarcity value of water, shadow price of water. There have been a lot of discussion now going on. But the more important, the point that I'm trying to bring in here, essentially, that water is something which can actually make a difference in terms of relevance for decentralized energy projects and centralized energy projects. This is something which can actually very important. Third and more important point is employment. There have been a lot of studies, particularly in Indian context also there have been studies, which essentially is trying to tell you that I can go take it to the, given the time constraint, I can give it to this slide. Look at this. So essentially, it tells you the first column essentially gives you the different supply chain segments. And the first row essentially gives you the picture of when the project size increases, what happens to the number of jobs that are created. We call it FT, full-time employment. So you can clearly see that last column essentially is a large scale or ultra mega scale, utility scale project, where the job numbers are much lower compared to small scale projects, right? So we are also not including indirect jobs. These are basically direct jobs. So you can clearly get a sense that when you look at the small scale projects, decentralized projects, they have the potential to create more jobs. There could possibly be a whole lot of livelihood activity that can be created. But when you look at the centralized projects, they may not be able to create because your scale economy is happening and you may not be requiring that many number of employees to be employed by you. So hence, it is important for us to understand the fact that when you look at employment estimates, on that front also, your decentralized energy projects fare better compared to centralized. So whether it comes to land or it comes to water or it comes to your employment, you see that there are significant differences in terms of decentralized projects vis-a-vis centralized projects. Beyond that, these are all tangible. Then there are also intangible benefits, which are essentially the benefits which are accrued when you have decentralized energy. Let's say you have this. You know that when you talk about, there could be so many things which could be discussed, but I would try to limit myself to these few things. For instance, when you know that, okay, you are thinking about your decentralized energy projects. And when you're thinking about centralized energy projects, okay, there has been a lot of discussion going on. Okay, I told you in the beginning that India is an energy surplus country, right? Energy access, that is, Professor Hipu has done this exercise earlier, looking at energy poverty also. Trying to understand, there is even difference between access and availability of power. Okay, not only that, there is also the quality of power is something which is very important. When you're relying on grid, if the grid power is not available, you know that what kind of impact it can create, particularly for livelihood activities if we are using the energy, or for MSME sector, or for any industrial activities. Of course, for large industries, they have their own captive power plants. They can buy power from somewhere else. But for small scale industries, if they're relying on centralized grid system and the quality and reliability not that much, it can lead to significant differences, right? So from that point of view also, if you're relying on decentralized energy systems, it could be beneficial for you as well, in terms of promoting livelihoods, in terms of creating what you call gender empowerment. Okay, can you rely on grid power for your cooking requirements? If you can think of that, can happen through decentralized energy projects. To gender empowerment, something which has not been. Of course, these are intangible benefits. Education, human development. When I talk about providing education and your what you call health related benefits, that can be, because you can, as I told you, there is, even though centralized electricity system has been penetrated to almost all villages now, and you have almost all willing households have been electrified. But the problem is that the quality and reliability of power is still questionable. Even the government report published in 2019, I believe, it says that 50% of rural areas are getting today even 12 hours of electricity. That you can imagine, there are problems. Okay, so this is essentially what you see, that these issues could be, to some extent, if you're kind of changing our approach, and it might lead to helpful in terms of what do you call socioeconomic benefits. And what is coming out is that recently, I think last year they come up with this guideline for using decentralized energy systems for livelihood, particularly in the case of agriculture. They're trying to connect it to, because the agriculture system, I don't want to get into that because of the time constraint. There have been a lot of interesting issues which are coming up. You know, everybody knows that electricity was almost available free to agricultural consumers. As a result of which, the farmers extract more water, and what do they do? They get electricity at a free, almost like at a very low price. And who are the owners of these pump sets? They are actually the large scale farmers. They sell the water to the poor farmers. So from both sides, they get benefited. So there have been recently, because of ISA penetration, and of course, because of the developments that are happening, there have been a lot of focus now on decentralized energy applications, particularly for the agricultural system. They're saying, okay, you can use the solar pump sets, and you can also, they're incentivizing farmers. These models have been tried out in Gujarat, of course, in Punjab as well. That the extra energy that you get can be sold to the grid. So there have been a whole lot of particular complications that are associated when you think of transition, when you think of the way that are transiting from the non-renewables to renewables. So the process is not that smooth, not that very straightforward. There are also, if you look at this particular slide, it essentially talks about stranded asset issues, and essentially tells you when we are moving away from the non-renewables to renewables, there's a whole lot of debate going on globally that you actually create a lot of stranded assets. What do you do with this, right? Particularly for electric vehicle space. Okay, so when you're moving away, what do you do with old vehicles? And there have been recently stranded asset issues have already been encountered by in Indian context, particularly in the context of gas-based power plants. So we set up gas-based power plants, but gas availability is very low. So hence, you know that these assets are lying unutilized. So these are essentially the wastage of resources. So you need to carefully think about it. Then I come to my final set of thing. I said that we need to be very careful when we think about radical versus incremental changes, because otherwise, if you're thinking of changing without including all the stakeholders in the process, it might be looking good, or it might be looking good in terms of immediate or what you call a short-term solution, but long run, it might create some adverse implications. So you'll have to be very, very careful and look at the changes, look at the processes of changes, what could possibly be done when it comes to coal to renewables, when it comes to centralized to decentralized. All these approaches have to be made more, what you call, inclusive. Market segmentation, I think due to structural issues. I told you that when you look at Indian context particularly, and as you know that energy in the concurrent list, you see there are actually each of the state could be market. Even within state, you have segmentation of market. So you cannot have a uniform policy, uniform approach to resolve these issues. You need to understand that different markets have different characteristics, different features. Accordingly, you come up with a solution which could be fitting into that particular context. Institutional policy level inconsistencies and misalignments. You do not know. So, for instance, what you do is that sometimes what happens, I know I did this while doing my PhD. There, if you look at, let's say, energy, waste to energy projects, what happens essentially is that when you look at waste to energy projects, if you look at the regulatory strategy, one state, let's say, is a leader. So, other state, what it does is essentially copies the regulation from that. So, you need to, that essentially means that your capacity, okay, has to be strengthened. Of course, there have been efforts made. For instance, forum of regulation has been created at the central level, basically to come up with guidelines to help states. So states are not equally placed in terms of implementing it, devising solutions, framing policies. There have been, of course, if you look at, let's say, renewables, I told you that nodal agencies which are created in 80s, that they are still there. So they have been doing, they are doing activities. But then this, whether these entities are empowered, do they have adequate capacity to deal with the developments? And realizing this, some of the states have taken initiatives. For instance, Orissa has created GetCall. GetCall is primarily created to deal with the centralized large-scale renewable projects. So you need to think about this, because given the kind of dynamism that you're facing, hydrogen mission is coming up. Okay, so what should be done? E-vehicles, are the states are equally empowered? Do they understand what kind of implications it's going to create? Are they including all the stakeholders in the process? Right. So it becomes important to understand the fact that you're creating an enabling ecosystem is something that's very, very crucial, and you need to be very cautious when you're looking at the approaches of this change. Otherwise, it might create long-term opportunities. I'll stop here. I'll have close to 8 to 10 minutes for the questions. I'll be happy to discuss. Thank you once again to Professor Hipu and Professor Hari for giving me this chance and opportunity. And it'll be really a pleasure to interact with students and others in future as well. Thank you once again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Professor Gopal. Thank you so much. If you can kindly stop sharing. Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. May I now request Professor Hipu to, I cannot see him. Okay, may I now request Professor Hipu to be there as in discussion, please, sir. Professor Hipu is from IRMA. Sir, may I request?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, well, I mean, it is very difficult to summarize what Dr. Gopal just presented. I think in a kind of a valedictory talk, and fits it to a valedictory talk because he almost, went, particularly in the sector of energy, he had not left anything untouched. So, I, I suggest. He too, probably if it is okay with him, he can share the slides with all the participants so that we can, I mean, it's basically a kind of a marathon race on gamut of energy issues, what he spoke of. And then, then we can actually, all the participants basically, I mean, that we can, depending upon, relaxedly, we can look at those slides and basically see the various issues, because as he has been also mentioning during the talk that some of the issues his PhD students are working on, and which basically goes on to say almost each of these points are worth researching for a few years for a researcher at a doctoral level. So what kind of land we need, what kind of hybridization we need, what kind of, whether we can go for solar double cropping, which Japan has incidentally, adopted, but is it good enough? I mean, I remember there was a study by Germany, which actually, looked at that we should have solar installation like a chessboard. Okay. I mean, one box solar panel, one box empty, one box solar panel, one box empty. So that actually you can have enough of crops that we can have below the panels, and also you can have the solar generation as well. So I would just like to bring in one issue to I mean, I will not dare to summarize all of the things what he said, but then one issue I would like to bring in to say that sometimes the best of intentions might not work. I mean, the example is recently we visited, some farmers who had implemented here the solar installation under a program which is called Sky program. The Sky program is basically for it's a Gujarat state run program. Here, the farmers were basically incentivized to use some of their farmland, not a lot, but whatever they decide. I mean, like they would come out with something like maybe 18 to 30, or you can maximum they can go up to 60 kilowatt range solar panels. I mean, the panel of able to generate that much of power. And the scheme was the following. The scheme was that of course you have to use it for your own purpose of getting water for irrigating your field, but that would be always a very less amount, and you only need it only in few months in a year. So all the excess power you generate and all the rest of the months which is not irrigation months, you basically feed in that electricity to the grid. And for that you would be paid 7 rupees per unit for 7 years, and then obviously after that, of course, you will not be paid that high. You will be paid slightly less, but initial years to basically, because that is something like a typical 25 kilowatt plant would cost around maybe 10 lakhs or so for the farmers to install, and so that money has come on a loan, and that actually would require probably 7 years to pay back. And the extra money which you get, which farmers per year they used to get something like 1.5 lakhs, and we calculated also just a back of the envelope calculations of the money they are getting monthly, and then the money. So that was the good enough money to actually repay the loan and afterwards obviously the system is theirs, and it is free. I mean, in the sense the energy you generate, you can feed into the grid at a 3.5 rupees. Now we got two contrasting stories. Okay, so one farmer was so he has done so well. Okay, he has actually, he says this is a miracle in my life, because I actually even sitting at home, I just look at my mobile, what is the generation today, and if anything goes also out of wrong, goes wrong, anything goes not out of normal, I can quickly attend to it by coming to the field. Otherwise I can be in home for months without looking at this system. And of course I do take care of he has made an arrangement to clean the panel, which he regularly does. And we did see, in fact, we participated also in one of the cleaning activity on that day. I mean, so that is the story of one farmer. Okay, and the story of other farmer is when we went to that installation is completely dusty, and he says, okay, I mean, we asked how much you are generating and what kind of benefit you are getting. Oh, I don't care. I mean, I really dislike this system. So we asked about, no, you able to know from your app, from your mobile, because that's what we just learned from the other farmer who is actually doing that from the day one. I mean, so both the installations are equally like 2 to 3 years old. But then this farmer even doesn't know that there is an app like this exists, and which he could have downloaded and he could have monitored actually. Whereas the other farmer, if you see, the awareness level is so high that whenever the inverter has become dysfunctional or functioning at any fault happens, he had actually in the last 2 years could able to, within the guarantee period of the inverter, he could able to replace the inverter maybe 2 times, 3 times that he was claiming, and which is itself is a lakh or a couple of lakh rupees, the inverter itself, which he actually could replace multiple times. So the views they had is completely opposite. The one farmer in saying that actually I want all my farms to be with the solar. I mean, I don't want to actually go for agriculture. Okay, this is giving me much better money in a much lesser hardship. Actually, I ask government to install this. If there is a choice which would be given to me, I would go for my entire farmland with solar. The other farmer is saying that please take away this system from my land. I don't want it. Please take this scrap from my land because this is what is actually, is a burden to me. I was earlier getting electricity at a subsidized rate of 50 paisa per unit. Now, because of this system, I have been charged 3.5 rupees per unit. And, so this is, which is actually so much, like 7 times more. Okay. And this is something which is ridiculous. He is saying, and please, if you are coming from, you have any connection, you please tell the authorities that I don't want this system. This system should be out of my land, at this moment. I don't mind that. So with the scheme being same, with the state being same, I mean, because Dr. Gopal talked about a lot of federal structure, the village being same, the farmers, a socio-economic lifestyle being same. That's what we observed from their household and from their belongingness, and from their belongings in the sense their assets, etc. The one difference which has made to this different kind of expectation or different kind of results out of this system is because of the energy awareness they had, or the awareness about the scheme they had. I mean, once we started telling the success story to the one who has actually a failure story, the person is saying, where is the app? I want to install it. I mean, then we helped him to install, but it was taking time. So he didn't know actually that there is something like that exists. And the minimal thing in that, the cleaning part. See, this particular farmer, though it is as I said, it's a 10 plus lakhs investment, but unfortunately the scheme had no provision for providing that small, maybe half a HP pump to actually do that cleaning activity. So therefore, this particular farmer being aware actually has done by himself, whereas the other farmer, the second farmer, has not done it. Okay, because that scheme actually didn't include that cleaning part into the total scheme of things. So that made the difference. That made the difference because this farmer is, because being aware, has done it, whereas this farmer, where the efficiency might have gone down and the production might have gone down. So I'm saying energy stories are very, very complex as well as interesting. I mean, we thank Gopal for bringing out those dimensions into the discussion. I hope all the participants must have benefited, and that would not have been a better fitting talk, as a end talk, if I may say, for this conference on energy transition for sustainable development. Thank you, Gopal. Yeah. And if in the meantime, if any participants, though they didn't have question before I started speaking, but if there are questions now, please, I request Ravani to take up those questions if there are any.
Thank you, Professor Ripu. Thank you, Gopal sir. Questions, I'll just check because since we are already into the time of valedictory, so if I just collate the questions, I might take the privilege of sending them to Gopal sir later on. Let us just push into the valedictory. That's already time here. I would now request the brainchild behind this conference, in fact, the one who has mapped up the journey altogether, Professor Lakshmikant Hari, to address the valedictory function with his vote of thanks. Professor Hari, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So we came to the end of this 3-day conference. So my role is like initially to give the welcome address, and I'm here at the end to just give the vote of thanks. I'm going to do something unusual for the vote of thanks, of course, and again, which is usual for the academicians. So I'm going to use the PPT to give the vote of thanks. To begin with, first and foremost, we would like to thank all the committee members and all the organizers would like to thank our Chancellor, Vice Chancellor and Director, Vice Chancellor and Director for giving this opportunity, and that too in an area like energy transition. So where every B school, almost all the globe is talking about the e-vehicles and issues, we choose something like something different, an energy transition highlighting various issues, and and we thank Chancellor, Vice Chancellor, and Director for giving this opportunity to take up this topic for a conference and organizing this. And of course, then the most important, let me thank the participants, all the participants of this conference, then the audience to remain with us patiently for the 3 days. Moving ahead, we had a 3-day conference, in fact, 3 off day or a 3 hours conference. We could have done it in all these things in single day, but given the online trauma we are going through for the past 2 years, we thought like it's better we break it up the sessions in 3 days so that like we all can have a good, nice learning experience. During these 3 days, we had 2 keynote sessions, 4 invited talks, and 6 paper presentations. The conference began with the setting of the tone by the Professor Rajashekhar Pillai, Vice Chancellor, Somaiya University. Sir stressed the importance of energy and the energy policy, and he also talked about the recently released hydrogen policy and ammonia policy. He stressed that like what is the importance of these policies, the need of and scope for the B schools management institute to look into these issues, energy issues. And they also stressed for the collaboration between management and engineering institutes to work in this interdisciplinary area of energy research. Then the encouraging and welcoming address given by the Professor Monica Khanna, Director, KJ Somaiya Institute of Management. She stressed the importance of energy and sustainability in the businesses and B school education. And she also said that like encouraged and stressed that the management institute is taking lead to organize this kind of a conference and focusing on energy and business energy transition areas. The first keynote session we had is by the Professor Benjamin Savakur from the University of Sussex, and also the editor of energy research for the Social Sciences Journal. The topic of the session is on global energy transition. He gave the overview of energy transition issues across the globe, starting with the definitions, conceptualization theories, and what are the issues in that. He also stressed on the various empirical studies and which focus on the diffusion. Professor Savkul warned us about like check the assumptions whenever we are taking up the kind of studies you take, whether it's based on definitions or the empirical. He stressed the importance of the assumptions and also stressed that like maybe we require a carbon tax to accelerate this transition process. And also like coming to the particularly to the India, he said like the cultural aspects may play a key role in energy transition. I thank Professor Benjamin Savkul for like agreeing for the keynote session and giving this wonderful insight for the future research. Next, second keynote session is on the day 2 by Dr. Devajit Palit, and it's on the topic on India's energy transition. And Dr. Palit stressed on the grid integration, which will be the main hurdle for the transition. And he also said like maybe next 20-30 years, we may not get away with the coal. At least the dependence will be high compared to the other renewable energy sources. He also stressed the importance of various technology aspects, and he stressed that like finance may not be the issues if you have a proper technological solution. And he ended this session on like adding the 2 more Ds to the 5D framework, which is already the 3D framework. One is decarbonization of generation, decentralization of delivery, digitalization of transition, and he proposed 2 more Ds, that is democratization of grid and deregulation of electricity markets. And I thank Dr. Devjit Palit for like agreeing to the keynote session, giving his like wonderful insights on the India's energy transition issues and challenges. Then we have like 4 invited talks spread over like 3 days. First one by Professor Raman Ramchandran, is professor of practice, KJSO Minister of Management, coming from the chemical industry. He gave insights on how the chemical industries can adapt to the sustainability, what is the importance of sustainability for the chemical industries. He also stressed about the policy of ammonia and green and gray hydrogen, the cost involved in it, and the cleaner production techniques in these areas. Then yesterday we had a session by invited talk by Roma Balwani from the Vedanta. Coming from the mining industry, talking about the energy transition is something like which nobody would like to do. But yeah, she says that like we can't get away. The mining industries like energy transition is important, but they focus on something called the sustainability index. And she stressed that like what is the importance of ESG for these companies, and she also stressed on the importance of governance and leadership aspects in the sustainability and the transition part. And today we had two invited talks. First one is on communicating sustainability by Sudha Iyer. She highlighted various issues why we are not able to communicate sustainability to the masses and what other things need to be done. She highlighted those. Then just now we had a talk by Dr. Gopal Sarangi on the renewable energy transition in India. What are the issues and challenges? Dr. Sarangi talked about the transition from the coal to renewable energy sources. What are the issues in it? And also when it comes to the renewable energy sources, she highlighted that the centralized and the decentralized projects. What are the issues involved in that? I thank all the keynote speakers and invited talk experts for giving us the insights in the energy areas, wide variety of aspects from global to Indian energy transition to particular to the renewable energy sources, and the three talks from the industry, from experience of chemical industry, then the ESG by mining industry, and sustainability, communicating sustainability in general. We had 6 paper presentations, and these are we mainly, being the energy transition is the narrow topic, we mainly banked on invited papers, and we also had a very short time, so still we got 6 very interesting good papers. By first one we had by KJ Sharma, and on the India's household ready for the low carbon transition. Second one we have this Gharat by Professor Anjali Chopra and Professor Aparna Pandey. Third one is on the community based renewable energy projects by Rahul Mishra. And today we have three more presentations on smart and energy efficiency approaches by Chetna. Then wireless charging techniques for the electric vehicles by Sachin Karar. And lastly, strategies in setting the new renewable energy plants by Anasuya Gangopadhyay. All these interesting 6 papers cover the different aspects of the energy transition. They are like unique in their own area, their sense, but of course addressing the core concept of energy transition. So we thank all the researchers and coming and presenting their ideas in the conference. Then we have like 3 highly intellectual session chairs, starting from Professor D. Hegde. Hegde sir, my PhD guide from National Institute of Industrial Engineering, Mumbai, of course, retired professor. Then we had like Professor Hippu and Professor Binil, Professor Hippu from IRMA and Binil from NITI. And those who attended the sessions, they know that the kind of feedback they give on the papers, I'm sure they're like extremely beneficial for not only for the presenters, but for all the audience and participants. I thank all the session chairs for this coming us and giving us the valuable input to the presentations. Then I don't require, when it comes to this thing, I don't no more require the presentation. Maybe somebody help me to put all the PR team on the spotlight, please. So let me tell you, like this conference is live streamed on three platforms: Facebook, Instagram, and in also the YouTube. And this entire process is managed by our PR team without any hurdle. We never felt like this we are going on live, we have to do something and all. The entire process is managed, very well managed by the PR team. Can I see them?
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much on the behalf of the team.
Can I see all of the team, Pulkit?
Yeah, sure, sir. Abhash, if you can.
I guess the others have dropped off.
Yeah, okay, fine. So the Pulkit represents the PR team, and he managed entire session without any glitch or anything. And thank you, Pulkit, and entire PR team for like supporting us and like make the entire conference go live and make it available for all the audience.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
So that's Abhash on screen who's been hosting the session.
Great.
And they have different volunteers for each day. So yeah. Thank you for their behalf.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for the mention. Means a lot.
Thank you. Then yes, I have my own team, the core conference team. Can I, Pulkit, can you put them on the spotlight, please? Starting from Professor Hippu, then Binil, Arvind, Sudarshan, Shravani. Yes, this is the core conference team, which helped us like successfully organizing this conference. See, academics, I remember a famous quote from the last lecture. Academicians need to follow certain formalities, even if you are busy in other activities like dying or something. That's by the famous quote by Randy Push. We need to follow certain formalities. But having said that, we never had to follow any formalities. We have never seen any formalities between us and Hippu or Binil. They are from the different institutions, and we never had any formal collaboration or anything. But yeah, they are part of this conference organizing team. They helped us. And of course, we have not seen any difference between the Somaiya team or others. And I thank Binil, thank Binil and Hippu for being there with us from the beginning, from the, ideation to the discussions, to the late night discussion, to the till the end. Thank you, Binil. Thank you, Hippu, for this. Then I had like Sudarshan, who is the go-to man for any issues, whether it is from the any technical issues, website issues, or anything. We bank on Sudarshan. So he is the go-to man for all the solving those issues. Then we had Arvind in our team. Of course, he represents PR, but he's a core part of this Center for Sustainable Development, he's interested in sustainability, energy, climate change, and of course, the communication part of these things. So, and he very well managed the entire, not only the PR aspects, of course, also the core schedule of the conference and all. And last but not the least, we have like, of course, I need not to give any introduction or anything, the face of the conference, Dr. Shravani. She's been with us working all the days, of course, with all the complaints and anything, but still she's here with us with a smiling face. And yes, I thank my conference team for being with us and like helping us like successfully organizing this conference. Yeah.
Pleasure working.
The couple of things. This is the first conference organized by the Center for Sustainable Development. We missed a couple of things. We are late in putting certain things on the schedule or things announcing early. We made something. We might have missed some of other aspects. But yeah, we are learning. So there may be some issues. There may be some discussment. I take the responsibility for all those things. Of course, we are learning and we'll come back in better way. Last, there are a couple of takeaways from this conference. So with all the discussions on the energy and transition for the past 3 days, it's stressed that like transition is a must. but it's not going to be the easy. We can't completely talk on electric vehicles or all those end use things. We need to focus on, like, of course, coal is going to be remain with us. We can't get away with the coal in lifetime, but we need to see how to start the transition. And we need to focus on certain things like energy sufficiency, reducing the energy consumption, which not many talks about this thing. We need to look at the consumption. It's not just the production side. We need to look at the consumption aspects, energy sufficiency, those aspects we need to look at. These are some of the takeaways from this conference, which center would like to focus on energy sufficiency, energy policy issues, and integrating with the businesses, like how we can integrate with the business strategies, these things. And yes, with this we come to the end of this conference, and we may come back next year. We'll get back to you soon on these aspects. And thank you one and all for supporting us. Thank you.
Yeah, let me just